Hello, I am Tercy Summaries, and this story begins with a fateful day for the secondary family. The father, thinking that a disgusting thing had been born, and to the baby's misfortune, on that very same day and hour, a boy named Kajin was born, who was blessed by the sword god Kasak. Born with an extraordinary body and talent. The mother thought that if her son were Kajin, her life would be much better, the protagonist. Later realized why his mother and father were so disappointed in him. He was missing an arm, the right arm. His mother, disappointed, whispered every night if he could just die, but all he wanted was to live. He heard while in the womb what his father said, that the child in his womb was the hope of the family, that he had never been able to surpass his older brother. But this child would be better than his son. His father hoped he would defeat Kajin, but he was born with only one hand and without the blessing of any god. He was a disgrace who trampled on his father's hopes. Just for being born, that was the protagonist. At an early age, Kajin was loved by everyone. His smile was angelic and he could already walk, but our protagonist developed differently. But his mother didn't understand when he barely managed to stand and take a step. The mother was disappointed since Kajin already had a blade in his hands. What was the point of starting to walk when he was already so far ahead? And when the protagonist finally managed to take the sword, Kajin had already experienced mana and started training the Grimas. The mother kept thinking, I wish her son were Kajin, and the protagonist began to grow under a huge shadow, which covered him in darkness. At some point, Kajin became an object of worship and envy for the protagonist. When he was 7 years old, he was sent as Kajin's assistant. Outwardly, he was known as someone sent as a helpful friend, to support and assist Kajin as a cousin. But the truth was that his parents sold him for 300,000 latent. The cousin humiliated him, beat him, and said things like, "It's the first time I've seen a damn loser like him," and Kajin disliked him from the start. A damn loser like him, and Kajin disliked him from the start. The protagonist was the person he vented his anger on. He had to hold back his tears. It wasn't that it didn't hurt. It was harder to bear the fact that the adults passing by ignored such a situation. His uncle was known as an incredible man, but he left the family a long time ago and never came back. Because of that, there was no one to control Kajin. So he grew up as a boss with superior talent. And the blessing of the sword god became a poison for him. In the training field, Kajin is beating up a character with hands raised, says he's lost, but Kajin, with a mocking laugh, tells him if he really thought it was over. When he said he lost, Kajin breaks his mouth. And what happens next? The next one was our protagonist, now with a more developed body, and the look of someone who wants to be a warrior. He was jealous of Kajin's strength and talent. He also wanted to be strong. He lunges forward with a challenging look. Kajin, without much effort for the attack, tells him to stop looking at him like that he doesn't like it, and sends him flying. He tells him he's an armless loser, and how dare he look at him like that. He thinks he can beat him by working hard. Someone like him can work hard all his life, but still won't be able to keep up with Kajin. The protagonist wants to win, really wants to win, but his dreams can't be reached by hard work alone. Kajin became lazy in his training. As he grew up, alcohol, girls, and drugs became part of his life, but still, the protagonist couldn't beat him. Kajin was the genius who didn't work, with luxury, wealth, women, and alcohol. And the protagonist was a genius of persistence, of hard work, but without talent. Years later, the two were adults competing in a real battle that was being watched by the whole city. The protagonist strikes the ground, blinding Kajin. He jumps into the air. As the smoke clears, Kajin is kneeling before the protagonist. So far, the protagonist's record against Kajin, it was 21 fights and 21 defeats. After 29 years, he finally managed to defeat Kajin, and in unofficial fights he lost countless times. People kept telling him to give up every time he lost. They mocked him for being a talentless fool wasting his time. But still, he won. Everyone began chanting the protagonist's name. The protagonist remembers the words he heard until his ears bled. Those words echoed in his mind. If you were Kajin, if my son were Kajin, if my son hadn't been born without an arm, my son has no talent. Finally, those words were fading away. And he tells Kajin that if he were Kajin, he wouldn't have wasted his life on alcohol, girls, and drugs. He would have lived a more meaningful life. Without stepping on the weak, and he withdraws victoriously, taking firm steps, and he would finally know how to finish. Kajin had stabbed the protagonist in the back. He believes Kajin was a coward until the end of his days, which hurts him, but it hurts more to feel that he finally managed to defeat Kajin, but it seems he can't live to feel that emotion. He was pierced by the famous sword that is only used in the direct line of the Simon family. It also contains the mana of the Simon family, the anti-demon mana. Unless the miraculous Saint Rayla appears, he has no hope of living, and with his last words, he tells Kajin that he will be remembered as a loser. The scene changes. The protagonist is tied to a chair in some kind of dungeon, asking if he is in hell. Hell. You are a lucky guy. Who would have imagined that the miraculous was present in the arena? Indeed, for the luck or misfortune of the protagonist, there was a saint among those present who saved him, but the protagonist had his entire body broken. All he could do was just breathe, and everyone thought he had made a contract with the devil. The only way for a loser like him to defeat Kajin was by making a contract with the devil, and his parents had admitted it, so it was useless denying it, and that sacrifices and bottles with his blood had also been found for the contract in his family's house. It was a demon who sacrificed 300 innocent children to become stronger. The young master Kajin stabbed him and the devil to protect the family's honor. Simon and the fugitive understand. He defeated Kajin, but not Simon's family. He chose Kajin over him, and being accused, he must serve a life sentence. The tendons in his arms and legs were cut. The mana was sealed through many layers of chains. Kajin has come to visit the protagonist and says, "It looks very good that he became a sword emperor." People praise him as a hardworking genius, and that was thanks to him, a damn loser. After that humiliation, the food supply to the protagonist dropped drastically. He began to lose weight in a shocking way. He spent every day hungry. At one point, he started coughing up blood. He was beginning to die, but he didn't want to die like that. He wanted to die with honor. He should have died in the arena, but that was not the fate he wanted. If he hadn't been born maimed, he would have had a different life. If he had been from the direct line, if he had the blessing of the sword god, if he had it, his life would have been different. He didn't want to die. With all his strength, he wanted to live. We switch to a scene where he is being challenged, and he is surprised as he feels pain in his right arm. He also thinks it's a dream, but it feels too real to be a dream. And the person challenging him is an adult from the family. But how does he know that person, and why does he call him Vinchen? He realizes some memories are coming to him, but he doesn't understand them very well. But the dream isn't so bad for him. The air feels fresh. It doesn't feel as disgusting as the air in the underground prison. It's a dream where he has a right arm, and the adult yells, "How long do you plan to ignore it?" But the protagonist realizes he is injecting mana to try to cause him pain. So he goes on guard with his right hand, defending himself, and sending the left palm flying. He's surprised, since it was a very harsh attack. He apologizes for going too far, but the adult scolds him, saying he was insolent just because he belonged to the main family, and that his son will crush him mercilessly. Moreover, it will be the first time the branch family will crush the main family. To provide context, the branch family is the secondary branch, which doesn't have much power, nor many positions or money, so it's like the disgrace, so to speak. He realizes that this person is just like his father, who has always wanted to defeat the main family. The moment he realized that dream was impossible for him. He started projecting it onto his son. The adult will never forget the protagonist's arrogance and that he would only wait for the true sword assembly. He resigns himself to thinking that it's not a dream. Slowly, memories start coming back. His mother in that life died after giving birth to him. His father didn't care about him at all, and all the kids treated him like a scapegoat. He was part of the main family, which had 8 children, and he was the 7th. His name was Vincent. He was so cowardly that he would shrink and cry in his room after being slapped by the youngest in the family. He was an ugly duckling, abandoned by the rest of the main family. So he comes to the conclusion that the one-armed David from the Simon family has become the useless Vincent from the Denka family. He finds Vincent's diary that only contains bad things about why he can't be like his brothers. All his relatives try to trample on him. His maids and attendants ignore him, and that he is defective and would rather die. He concludes that it seems God answered the boy's prayers because the protagonist only wanted to live and he only wanted to die. A voice appears, whispering, he was Vincent, the original body's owner, but he no longer has that name since he gave away his body. So please call him Julian, and that he was a revelation, or better explained, originally a lesser god. He intended to summon a spiritual god, but unfortunately, the protagonist appeared. However, that doesn't bother him, since his only mission is to fulfill his calling. And he can become a true god. The protagonist understands his circumstances, but he's not interested in his achievements at all, because he'll be busy living his own life. So he won't have time to help him. Julian understands this, but nevertheless, his spiritual energy is incredibly low. If it disappears completely, that body he has will die. But the protagonist disagrees, because that body is too healthy for an early death. However, he suddenly faints, and Julian will also give him the true memories of that body. He realizes he had never fallen into despair. He always tried to play the coward and was preparing the ground for his revenge. The protagonist realizes he had reincarnated into a world he wasn't prepared for. Julian asks him to listen from now on, since he can also gain many good things from their deal. He tells him the story of the archdemon Davin and the hero king Kajin. This story happened 500 years ago. A one-armed swordsman, David, escaped from Simon's prison. Using a contract with a demon, he devoured thousands of people to become stronger, and that's why he's recorded in history as a great demon. The protagonist wonders if he has traveled 500 years into the future, or what the chances are that 500 years ago there was a person named Davin and another named Kajin. But still, he was sure he died 500 years ago in prison. It makes him very angry to know they didn't even let him die in peace, that they even fabricated the story and talked about the great demon and the hero, that they should stop the nonsense. That story was simply made up. But he calms down and asks him to please continue. Then, the hero king swallowed his tears and worked with the greatest hero of the time, his best friend, the Sun Emperor, and together they were able to defeat the great demon king. The protagonist remembers there was another hero, but he realizes it was the brat who admired him a lot. Although it was when Arslan was young, he was a friend and disciple of his. He used to visit him from time to time in the dungeon, telling him that he never committed any crime and that the authorities would not win, that he was going to secure his honor no matter how long it took. But after that day, Arslan never returned, and we are told that Arslan is the first patriarch of his family, which is called the Denka family, and his mission is to surpass the Simon family. That's why the protagonist was summoned. He starts thinking that the family was meant to fight against the truth. It's a coincidence. Arslan definitely told him he would discover the truth. He was someone who knew how they had been wronged. If this isn't a coincidence, and even if he could know everything, he is certain of it. Arslan Falcon abandoned the Falcon family and created the Denka family, which is a new family, established to restore the protagonist's honor. So if he truly fulfills the goal of surpassing the family, Julian really could become a god. Julian confirms it, and if that happens, his body will belong to the protagonist. So that deal benefits both of them. The protagonist thanks Arslan and will inherit the mission he left behind. He will surpass the family that betrayed him. Then, the protagonist goes to check what battle techniques have evolved in these times. Since 500 years have passed, and the legacies of swordsmen always evolve. And while he is examining the body, it starts failing him and he faints again. He expresses that this body is trash, and that if he doesn't use mana to control it, he won't be able to live a normal life. He notices a small detail and calls Julian to ask why he wouldn't have learned to handle the sword. Julian answers him that he had a disability that prevented him from learning it, and to let him go, that he was just born that way. But the protagonist says it's not like that, that he has a celestial exoskeleton that literally can store mana anywhere in his body. More precisely, it can store mana in his bones, but Julian doesn't quite understand the protagonist. He asks him to listen carefully. A martial artist needs to use mana to possess a transcendent strength beyond that of a normal human. The mana that causes miracles is usually stored in the human heart, but having a celestial exoskeleton means you can store mana in your bones, above your heart. That means he is capable of using mana infinitely. And all of that was very ironic, since Julian, the person everyone called a hero, and whom he hated, had that ability. Julian also adds one thing. He says he cannot link the imaginary heart with the real heart, but the protagonist does not understand what that means. The imaginary heart is the imaginary storage for his mana, but the protagonist doesn't understand why they don't store it directly in the heart. In his time, that was the method of storing mana, but well, in his era, they store mana in the imagination and call them stars. The number of stars used represents the strength of the martial artist, and the protagonist begins to gather mana from his heart by tapping it, saying that they have to risk so much if they want to be known as proper martial artists. And that David, with one arm, learned that method and also grew that way. But Julian totally disagrees. His order is wrong. He doesn't know the circuit formula and lets his mana flow anywhere. There is a formula to use mana efficiently, but the protagonist says that in his time, they only did it by feel. Half of them survived. Isn't that a good statistic? And he accuses him of why he did so much damage to his body. That his body had great physiology, his heart and magic power circuit are strong. He would have succeeded if he had grown up with proper training from a Simon family, and that his body has been starving for mana for more than 13 years. At that rate, his body will die without having reached adulthood. Meditation will prevent the body from worsening, but there is a limit. He might have about 10 years left to live, but 10 years is enough. That is the time David was locked in an underground prison, slowly starving to death while longing for life during those 10 years. They were horribly terrifying. An assistant arrives to challenge him, asking why he was so locked up and what all that mess was about. His name was Wilson, and he throws the clothes at him to clean, and also to clean the room. He is surprised. The person he sees before his eyes seems much stronger, not the same coward as always, and he shouts that he must have learned dark magic or something like that. He is to notify the Grand Chamberlain immediately and inform the Patriarch, but the protagonist tells him what he's talking about in a way he shouldn't. He's being very arrogant. It's true that he gave him more work than usual, but it's not his job. After all, but Wilson had already told him before that he hates doing things he doesn't want to, but the protagonist takes the clothes from his hands and says he will go get them himself and go see the Grand Chamberlain he mentioned earlier to tell her he came personally because his worker and servant Wilson doesn't want to work. But Wilson realizes the protagonist is no longer the same, so he will start to respect him a little more. But Julian tells him to be a little careful too, because he's killed a lot of people, but the protagonist calms him. He has fought many people who, when they kill, have an energy that is absolutely different, and the servant doesn't have that at all. And he knows that because he had a hard life. The servant had already cleaned the room and brought the clean clothes. The protagonist asks if he could please bring a sword about 1 meter long, if a weight of around 500 grams would be okay. It must be made of wood with a black scent. Haha, that's what he literally said. I didn't make it up. And if he didn't want to do it, the gatekeepers were told that he had to come personally, since a servant didn't want to work, but he, thinking the protagonist was overstepping, touches his shoulder, and the protagonist with a single move sends him to the ground, apologizing because he had bad memories of being attacked from behind, and asking if he understood the lesson, to please behave, but the protagonist's body was screaming in pain just from doing so little. Wilson had something to say and tells him no, asking if he had said that. a meter of wood smelling like black, that it was true, and that he would bring it immediately. Then he slams the door shut. He apologizes because the door slammed loudly, due to the wind, and that he didn't do it on purpose. He hands the sword to the protagonist. He goes to the yard for proper training. He knows that celestial exoskeleton is extremely weak, but he didn't expect to be so tired after swinging the sword just a few times. He feels he has a long way to go. However, that feeling is good. At that moment, the training dummy is cut in two. The person apologizes because the mana energy was so weak he didn't think they were using that dummy. He asks if it was that useless Vinchen. Julian explains. His name is revenant Denka, a very collateral descendant, and also one of the candidates expected to win the sword assembly. He's already met that boy's father and warns to be careful. He's a rising star among the collateral descendants, and the most skilled among the 13 young men of the secondary family branch. He imagined that if he won the sword assembly, he would have to fight him, so he came looking for him. That competition gathers all the sons of collateral or secondary families. They make them fight, and the winner will have the honor of facing a participant from the royal family, which in this case would be the protagonist. He asks if he's not going to hide, since he's very weak and scared, that he won't be afraid of a sword, right? But the protagonist, putting him in his place with class, states that even provocations should have a certain level of dignity and class. How dare he cut someone else's scarecrow, which is the disgrace of martial artists. He should be ashamed of what he did, and his father should have taught him those manners, since he's from a secondary family. What the protagonist said makes him angry. He thinks he's a bastard and dares to insult his father. He has decided not to forgive him from the moment he chose to disrespect his father. The protagonist knows that if they fight right now, he will lose, but his opponent is full of hatred, still using mana, especially his sword. He can't control it well because that feeling was inherited from his father, and he thinks that even though 500 years have passed, the martial artist's mind has deteriorated. So the protagonist is going to teach this guy a real lesson. The blonde realizes that he can easily beat the protagonist, but he feels a strange sensation that the protagonist could cut him at any moment. He senses a very heavy atmosphere. The protagonist takes the sword away from him, warning that he should be careful, because at the sword assembly, the swords won't be made of wood. And the blonde, hearing those words, flies into rage, attacking the protagonist with everything he had, but being stopped by one of his relatives, telling him he can't fight the young Vinchen here, because if he fights, he'll have an excuse not to show up at the sword assembly. The blonde tells him they'll meet at the sword assembly and calls him a scared little kitten. Back to studying with Julian, he explains that traits are artificially created from analyzed power, a blessing made by man, and that Raven, the recent opponent, also had a skill called Iron Man. This skill is granted thanks to the Dwarf King, which includes many abilities, but Raven had Iron Man, which is a mid-level trait. Defense and destructive power are his specialties, and Julian was definitely right, because Raven, the blonde, showed an unmatched feat for his time, which was breaking the training dummy in half with a wooden sword, and that to begin with. To compete with people like that, you need to get used to those skills. He's back in the training field. Everyone mocks him because his sword control is too weak, and he even starts panting, getting tired after 3 strikes. He was useless, but then the vice commander of the White Sword unit appears. His name was Merlin, calming everyone down, asking what was so funny about the young lord. From the Denka family, he trained in martial arts. Everyone runs out, but murmuring in their minds, he also thought the same when he saw him, that a guy who swings a sword aimlessly, without any mana or traits, is destined to be despised by people. But what caught his attention a lot were the protagonist's eyes, which seemed to desperately search for something. Vincent asks him if everyone is watching and wonders why they couldn't go to a forest to train, but the protagonist neither had the time nor the stamina to go there. He was used to being looked down on, since no one expected the one-armed Davin to defeat Gadgen, but he did, and turned everyone's jeers into shouts of praise. Out of nowhere, someone gives him an advanced recovery potion, and thanks to that potion, he will be able to train more easily. The protagonist doesn't believe it much and asks if he's mocking him. But to be honest, he did from the start, although his eyes still seem to desperately search for something. He says goodbye thinking that this young man has changed a lot and hopes he has good luck on his path. The protagonist trained day and night, and not only physically. He also studied many books to have a good understanding of what he was doing. After refining his technique, performing every step correctly, he began to see his path to defeat Kajin. Finally, his sword had mapped out with points the trajectory his strike must have. To manifest the abilities, it finally worked. His sword skill was complete. Wilson hands the protagonist his breakfast. The protagonist realizes there is very little food and clearly sees that. He has food in his mouth, so it was him, and at that moment, he can see it as something adorable, but not to cross the line. Wilson was already getting tired of the protagonist's attitude and thinks he's going to kill him, but the protagonist can use telepathy and tells him he can control him through fear. But he doesn't want that. He wants his loyalty despite everything and asks him to stop acting proud in front of him and to stand by his side, to choose when the time comes, to be ruled by fear or to show loyalty. Wilson is left, truly amazed at how mature the protagonist has become, how strong he had gotten, and at his coldness. Then, the vice commander is at the training field and realizes that the protagonist finished his training early today. He looks at the dummy split in half and wonders if it had been with a real blade. But from what he saw, the protagonist was only using wooden blades. To achieve that, and on such a precise surface, that couldn't be real, such exponential growth in just a few days. The protagonist was completely surprised, changing his clothes. He notices that his clothes aren't made of the best fabric, and neither is his food. And that's even though he's a noble from a Maine family. He comes to the conclusion that someone is stealing his money, and it must be someone higher up than Wilson, because Wilson definitely wasn't the one. The scene shifts to the blonde, who is totally angry, training until exhaustion. Recalling the protagonist's words, his father enters saying his training is going very well, and that there isn't much time left until the true swords assembly. And if he wants to escape that life of poverty and pain from the secondary family, he must defeat Vincent, and he absolutely must do it. He must become the only member of the secondary family to defeat the main Revan family. He thinks his father is getting more and more irritated as the days to the assembly pass. Day after day, his father's obsession worsens, and if only he could beat Vincent, his father and family could be like they were before. Then Julian explains to him the last thing the protagonist needs to know, the prize for that competition. It's the mana crystal given to the champion. If ingested, the body and mana will instantly strengthen. The protagonist realizes from Julian's look and words that he has worked very hard, that he only wants to win, and he, even if he's not the spiritual king he hoped for, will give him a victory far more valuable than anything the spirit king could have granted him. And he calls Wilson to ask him for a favor. Wilson enters the Grand Chamberlain's office. She was very intimidating, but it was to be expected, since she had 7 stars of a martial artist, and Wilson had a message for the young master. He had something to tell the head of the family. He wanted to ask him directly to come to the True Swords Assembly, where he would prove his worth as a member of the main family. She says the head of the family has never observed the True Swords Assembly. He neither has the time nor the reason to do so, but Wilson says a phrase. This was the cost of having stolen from the young master, making possible what is impossible, and he leaves. She is confused but very proud of the protagonist, heading to where the head of the family is, informing him that the young Master Vinchen has invited him to the True Swords Assembly, where he said he would prove his worth as a member of the main family. But the head is resigned. He doesn't believe the protagonist has any worth. He is a person lacking skill and will disappoint him. But she insists he go, that if young Master Vinchen cannot prove himself, she will give her head. She stakes everything on the protagonist. The head still doesn't understand why she defends him so much. He thinks one reason might be that she was stealing money from the protagonist. But he knows she did it intentionally for Vinchen's sake. She intended to use that money for his future, but she wins. She saw the protagonist's courage and will participate in the True Swords Assembly. On the day of the assembly, the dome was packed with people. Ivan Khan had his eyes only on defeating the protagonist. And he also realizes that Patriarch Khan was there. It was his chance to defeat him. Completely in front of the Patriarch and the True Swords assembly. The True Swords begin. Vincent counterattacks with a sword, but is repelled by a shield. The opponent attacks, but to Vincent, it does absolutely nothing, since he has his Steelman attribute. And on his second attack, he breaks the shield and defeats his opponent. The father shouts with excitement, and everyone murmurs that this son is very strong. That attribute he had was truly impressive. He was a collateral descendant, but could perfectly be from the main family. The protagonist admires from afar. He believes that, based on the standards from 500 years ago, everyone competing were geniuses. Truly brilliant geniuses, but none have depth in their martial arts. He can't see any fighting experience in their moves. It's like they were puppets dancing on an answer sheet. After a few hours, the fights have ended and one sword remains firm in the arena. It was Raven's. And now, as the laws dictated, he asks to fight against the direct descendant of the family, and the protagonist accepts the challenge. Both were face to face with a smile on their faces showing. They were ready to fight. The protagonist draws his sword with both hands, revealing that he will fight with a wooden sword and won't use his right arm. He will also let his opponent land 3 attacks first. Everyone wonders what the protagonist is talking about. In fact, they have heard many rumors about how weak he is and that maybe he's gone crazy. He repeats that he won't move from his position until after the first 3 attacks. Raven thinks he's just doing it to humiliate him. People murmur that it's absurd. They start to wonder if young Vinchen really knows martial arts. The father shouts that he's only doing it to have an excuse when he loses, and that they should stop him, but the Patriarch allows it. It's better that. Vinchen proves his words with actions. The fight begins. The protagonist repeats that he will let him land the first 3 attacks. Raven attacks without hesitation. The protagonist knows the first attack will be a short stab and that it will also be a feint. For the second attack, which he deflects with one hand, signaling that 2 attacks have passed, Raven falls into desperation and attacks again. And the protagonist performs a maneuver and sends him to the ground. That was the 3rd attack. And he will fulfill Julian's promise. Now it's his turn to attack. Everyone is surprised by the protagonist's performance. Raven gets up, attacking with his skill activated. The protagonist dodges and counterattacks. But the blow doesn't hurt Raven. That fills him with confidence, since he thinks the protagonist has no strength. But that was exactly what the protagonist wanted. Taking advantage of Raven opening his guard, he lands a blow that sends him flying. And without wasting a single second, he attacks while Raven is in the air. His strike has to be perfect. He only has one chance and manages to see the edge of his domain. Raven's arm has been cut off, declaring the protagonist the winner. The protagonist's body was at its limit, but he still couldn't collapse. He kept his word, and the Patriarch declares the protagonist the winner of the True Sword Assembly. The awards ceremony begins, but the blonde's father enters, angry. Claiming there was some trick involved, the priest informs them that they couldn't save Raven's arm, which was an injury never seen before. The father accuses the Patriarch that even a 3rd-grade priest can't heal the wound, and that Vincent must have used some trick. Those present start murmuring that it could be a trick by Vincent. The protagonist clarifies to everyone that the assembly was observed and approved by the Patriarch, who named him the winner, and if the father thinks he is superior to the Patriarch because of what he said earlier, then Charles Denka will be arrested for publicly mocking the Patriarch. The Patriarch tells him he should be grateful to Vincent, since he only said prison, but his punishment should be much worse. Raven was still at risk of losing his arm, and the protagonist asks the priest to use the miracle stone he won to heal him. He cut Raven's arm, so he would take responsibility. Taking a sword, he cuts the ropes binding the father, asking him to properly educate his son, since he provoked him countless times, and to be able to heal him, he needs the right arm of someone else. The father is willing to cut off his own arm, proving his worth and love for his son. His life was spared. The apostle manages to save Raven's arm, resulting in a very paternal hug, and Wilson, admiring from outside, thinks the protagonist is truly amazing. After that, the protagonist receives a visitor. Is truly amazing. After that, the protagonist receives a visit. It was the Pontiff of Gaia, who came to deliver a miraculous stone to him. Since he had taught him a great lesson in compassion and wisdom, today the protagonist gladly accepts the gift and also gives him an insult, which basically means, treat me like a second-class pontiff, Julian. He also warns him that he might have dinner with the patriarch. Today, because of his victory, the protagonist dresses up just in case, and, indeed, Wilson delivers the news. He heads to the dinner. His stepmother is waiting for him. To see the patriarch. The patriarch exerts pressure just by speaking. He had called him for two reasons. One, to congratulate him, and the other was to validate his qualities. The stepmother's gaze exerted enormous pressure. He didn't like that feeling. The stepmother had the power to see if people were lying. She finds out that the protagonist's ability is very similar to that of the hero King Kajin, and the protagonist will have to talk about how he acquired that ability. Julian and the protagonist don't know what to say. Since they couldn't lie, the protagonist says it was acquired through a revelation. But revelations without blessing were bad, and he could even be judged by the court. Julian, resigned, asked him to just repeat what he tells him. If he were evil, a priest could easily recognize it. The one who gave him the miraculous stone as a gift. The stepmother's eyes don't react at all. So, that means he's telling the truth. The protagonist explains that he has learned a lot through revelations, but nevertheless, he has always been able to read the mysterious sword movements for a long time, but he also spent a long time wondering whether he should learn that or not. But he wanted to change. Even if they suspected him, he found it much worse to do nothing about it. He felt he had to prove something. He had to show that he was no longer a disgrace. He wanted to show that he was strong and would accept the father's judgment. To the letter, the patriarch stands up and gives his verdict. He asks Vinchen to continue his training, but his sword skill was too similar to Lord Kajim's skill, and the Simon family would cause an uproar and say they were stealing it. But they would have nothing to say if the skill belonged to the ancient demon king, so they would say that. The patriarch congratulates him again and asks if he could help with anything. The protagonist asks for access to the family library. The patriarch agrees and will also give him the Crimson Lotus Sword. That was the sword the patriarch himself used when he was young. It was practically part of the Denka family history, which made Julian very happy. He said that at first he was disappointed because he wasn't the spirit king, but he has achieved more than he could have imagined. And when they were about to return to their room, the stepmother wants to talk to him. She assumes he has worked hard and is proud. And because of his achievement, he should enter the family academy. Crimson, according to their customs. We are told that the fortress is a training academy owned by the Denka family, and the requirements to enter are to win the true sword assembly, and the other requirement is to defeat the low-rank demon, the Crimson Demon. And she gives him advice. There is no way to defeat the Crimson Demon with a single strike, and in the protagonist's current state, it would be impossible to defeat him. The protagonist realizes she had grown fond of them, thanks her, and leaves. She is surprised. She tried to explain the traits of the Crimson Demon, but the protagonist left without asking. He was in the presence of an amazing martial artist, fearless and unwavering. His heart races. He asks if Lady Servana was watching, since today her son had taken a great step as a martial artist. The scene changes. Wilson is singing that he has to help the protagonist, and suddenly he gets a hard hit to the head, probably because he was scheming something against the young lord. But he explains that he had changed, that now he was a worthy servant to the young lord, and tells her that she missed out on how awesome the protagonist is right now. The protagonist is in the library looking for information, but he doesn't find any records from 500 years ago. It was as if someone had intentionally erased all the records from that era. Julian asks if she knew much about that time. And who did he really belong to? The protagonist thinks it's time to reveal the information to Julian, since he has proven to be a trustworthy person. But he doesn't know how Julian will react when told that he is the demon. Dave, so first he tells him to calm down, to stay calm when hearing his name. But the protagonist, upon saying his name, Julian is disturbed by a very annoying noise. The protagonist tries to say his name again, but the noise bothers Julian too much, and Julian tells him they will leave it for another day. At that moment, the protagonist sees a book that might be useful. It was a romance novel. But in that library, there were only war secrets, so someone must have stored the information in a different format. The book said, "It was a hot summer day, and I got naked and went into the Ferris wheel." Julian didn't want to read anymore, but the protagonist discovers that the book contains the necessary teachings he needs. Thanks to that, the protagonist can manifest traits in his own way. Julian warns him that doing that is extremely dangerous, but the protagonist wants to try it immediately. He leaves the room and shouts of joy are heard. It was true that he had defeated Raven and won the competition. The protagonist asks Julian who she belonged to, and her name was Sari. She had left for a while due to a family situation. She, to the protagonist's surprise, was the only one who showed affection to a loser like Vinchen. She was very proud of the protagonist, and at that very moment, Raven arrives, who had something to say. The two were sitting face to face, without saying anything, and Raven draws his sword, putting the protagonist on guard, expressing that Sari should leave because it could be dangerous. Maybe Raven hadn't learned the lesson, but Raven, resting his sword, came to thank him and paraphrased. He forgave his disrespect and gave him his miracle stone. He, like a coward, tried to fix his arm at the expense of his father. But he recovered his arm, and his father was at peace again. He has regained everything, but he hasn't been able to give anything back. He has recovered everything, but hasn't been able to give anything back. That day he was a coward, but he wants to stop being one. And this is the best he can offer. He swears unconditional loyalty to the protagonist. Everyone is surprised, and the protagonist accepts the oath. Raven realizes that the sword the protagonist carries is the Crimson Lotus sword. And because of that, he doesn't regret his oath and thanks the protagonist. Sari is truly proud of all the changes. Vinchen and Julian say they can now have the traits of the Dwarf King's blessing from Raven. They also tell Raven their plan, which is to earn his blessing through a book they found. Raven has to guide him while the protagonist meditates. Basically, it's entrusting his life to Raven. The protagonist begins. Both are expectant. Raven gives instructions to form the correct shape of the symbol. The protagonist must focus on what Raven says and control his mana to form it properly. Julian tells him not to go so fast. Basically, he's doing somersaults off a cliff, and Raven also tells him not to rush, that this was already fast enough. So, take it easy, but the protagonist thinks you have to be willing to risk danger and move forward. The protagonist tries to form the symbol. He just needs to connect the last part of the mana flow, but Raven yells that it's too soon. And the protagonist had done it, but the connection breaks. In another plane, the stepmother and the patriarch are talking about the protagonist. They say the protagonist wants to enter the academy and must defeat the Crimson Demon in less than 6 months, but the patriarch asks her to tell Vinchen he only has 1 month to defeat him. We see Raven challenging the protagonist, who is moving too fast. It took him 6 months to be able to make the symbol. Julian also challenges him, and the protagonist thought he was about to reincarnate again. The Chamberlain was about to deliver the message and sees that everything is destroyed. He wanted an explanation. The protagonist says he was just meditating, but Sari tells him not to lie. The Great Chamberlain says it doesn't matter what it was. Whatever the meditation, it has to be done quickly. The patriarch has spoken. The ritual must be completed in less than a month. The protagonist believes this is because the patriarch has great expectations for him. The Grand Chamberlain asks him to try his best, saying he must complete the mission no matter what. Raven thinks it will take at least 2 months to obtain the Dwarf King's blessing. Sari asks him not to risk his life and realizes that Sari has an overwhelming amount of mana. Everyone asks what he will do now, since 1 month was very little, and he tells Raven if this was the correct path and that he was going to exceed the patriarch's expectations. 2 weeks later, they gather to begin the manifestation. The protagonist wonders what that was. Raven says it was the Dwarf King's blessing. The first of the defensive traits, body strengthening. He thinks he really did it, and it hasn't even been a month. The protagonist believes that with this, he can already defeat the Crimson Demon. He thanks Raven and has another favor to ask. 2 days later, it was time to go to the Crimson Demon's house. The Grand Chamberlain asks if he is sure, since only 2 weeks have passed. She has protected more of her brothers. In this trial, and none of them have failed, and Savannah's son could not be the first to fail. She asks him not to challenge the trial with baseless courage, but the protagonist calms her. He tells her there is nothing to worry about. In the carriage, he asks her why she tries so hard to help him that. He remembers the budget embezzlements and wonders if maybe she did that to purposely give him a weakness to hold on to, but if she doesn't want to talk about it, he doesn't mind, and that they had already arrived. She tells the protagonist to prepare himself, creates a mana barrier, and the Crimson Demon appears immediately. The protagonist asks the Grand Chamberlain to watch carefully and report what she sees. The Crimson Demon attacks. The protagonist knows better than anyone how to fight up close. She thinks his strategy was incredible that no one at 14 years old in their first fight. The protagonist would know something like this. He thinks the dwarf's trait was definitely incredible, and that it was the foundation for the swordsman's skill path. The Crimson Demon was very aggressive. After that, its attack would have many openings. He asks if she has seen what happened to the Grand Chamberlain, but she thinks he really doesn't know the reason why the Crimson Demon can't be defeated with a single strike is because it has a second life. The protagonist dodges and believes that even that was the same as 500 years ago. But the demon surprises him with an attack. He thinks those demons have evolved in speed and strength, and it was dangerous. The Grand Chamberlain wanted to intervene, but her interruption would mean failure for the protagonist, and she asks Lady Savannah not to let her son die. We are told the story of the protagonist's mother. She had saved him and asked him to join her group, so she joined the adventure to make the Denka family legendary. She was strong and beautiful, had the power to make people smile. She was a ray of light. And when Lady Savannah passed away, she swore to protect that boy until he became a respectable martial artist. But for 14 years, she saw that boy had no future. And when she began to see a glimmer of hope, he can't die, shouting at him to stop. The protagonist gives the signal. Vinchen counts on him and starts meditating. Raven uses the Steel Man skill, but the Crimson Demon was too strong, more than expected, breaking his sword. He can't hold on any longer, and the protagonist tells him he did a great job. He thanks Raven, but the Grand Chamberlain thinks the Patriarch might not be so pleased that he received help, and that this didn't meet the father's expectations. But he tells her to calm down. By killing one, the other will immediately come looking for him, and now it's his turn. He uses the Miracle Stone and can only use his skill twice. That's why he had to meditate, so his body could endure. The Grand Chamberlain's worry was for nothing. What Vinchen did was incredible. Julian asks him to rest, saying his body won't hold up any longer, but the protagonist decides to stay standing, and at that moment a summoning circle appears. Something never seen before. After that trial, a guardian had appeared of the artifact. The Grand Chamberlain asked them to leave because it was too dangerous. They are surprised by the level of a 7th star. They wonder what he was doing, but she realizes that he was aiming at the spirit's true form and that the young lords were in danger. She had been distracted, but the young lord, even at his limit, was able to realize how that was possible. The guardian was guarding a chest that contained a dead dragon's bone. They believe it was left by the family founder. That was a treasure that couldn't be measured in value. She asks him to take it, but he says that kind of loot would be family property, and he'd be in trouble if anyone found out. But she tells him she can handle those problems, and the protagonist splits the bone in half and tells her that he will be an accomplice too. The Patriarch and the Grand Chamberlain say the protagonist has accomplished the feat. He will have to report to the academy and is eager to hear the protagonist's story. She tells him she remembered young Master Raven, who has been influenced by the protagonist and helped him with the Crimson Demon. The Patriarch believes that the demon was too much for him and that he had to resort to cheap tricks. She tells him that after that he defeated another Crimson Demon alone and discovered the dragon skeleton left by the founder, which he split in half and gave her his share. The Patriarch tells her she missed something and orders her to try to break the skeleton. She tries once, using her best attack, but it does absolutely nothing. He explains that you have to be a first-class swordsman to be able to break that kind of skeleton. In another scene, Wilson asks the protagonist if he really has to go with him to the academy. Crimson Sari tells him, of course, they can't leave young Master alone, and the protagonist tells Julian if he still hadn't realized the mana flowing through Sari's body. He had seen a similar flow 500 years ago. Then he asks her what her last name was. She was from the ruined Heisley family, the protagonist. He understands the Heisleys have a technique called the magic body. He asks if she knows anything about her family's ancestors, but she only knew about her grandmother, who had recently passed away. The protagonist doesn't understand why such a powerful family fell into ruin. It could easily be the work of the family. Simon and Sari tell him that the protagonist's mother was also a Heisley and that he probably didn't know because talking about her was forbidden, and Sari confesses that she owed a lot to Miss Savannah Wilson. She also admits that she owes a lot to the protagonist's mother, and thanks to her, they were all there. Julian thinks his mother was amazing. Outside the mansion, Revan is waiting for him. He's going to say goodbye to the protagonist. He's leaving the house to improve himself. The protagonist understands and asks him one last favor. If he could find out about the Heisley family. He says it will be difficult, but he'll try. They say goodbye, and Revan tells him that next time he'll be stronger, so he won't embarrass him. After that, he asks the Grand Chamberlain for a favor. Not as Savannah's son, but as Vinchen. Also, that until he enters the Crimson Academy, she will train him. She tells him she won't be soft with him. Already at the training field, she tells him that she won't give him his trait until he gives her a wound, and she won't use her Black Moon sword because he still isn't worthy to face her. He had 5 months to enter the academy. The protagonist tells her he didn't see what she did to Revan, that it could be a permanent wound, and the Grand Chamberlain asks if she looks like Revan. The protagonist attacks instinctively. He saw blades in her eyes. She had a look that could kill someone. She also knows the way of the sword. She also knows it's tough. So she will be the best possible opponent, and that he knew he was friends with the priest and that they could get him help. For him, if something happened to the protagonist, it would be a week later. The protagonist's attack preparation was still too slow, and that was all for today. He notices his blade is about to break again. He doesn't know how many times he's changed swords these past few days, so he'll have to go to the blacksmith. The blacksmith's name was Hansen. He asks why he's coming at this hour of the night. She shows him all the swords she used during the week. He asks if she's had any fights with a sharp-clawed beast or a 9-star warrior, or with a swordmaster. She says no, she's only trained with the young Vinchen. He's surprised if she meant the ugly prince with no talent who wanted to meet him immediately. The protagonist asks why they wanted to see him at this hour. He says there was no reason why he couldn't come since he made that sword. Julian explains he was famous, had been making quality products for decades, but was ignored because he was blinded by money. The protagonist introduces himself and welcomes Master Hansen. He laughs at the title of Master and apologizes for arriving so late. The protagonist says it's no problem. The blacksmith thinks he looks a lot like his father. He admits he's heard bad rumors about him, but he proves the opposite. He asks to see Han Grelin to check how it's holding up, since he said he used it in his training. But he's surprised. The sword's blade looks like new. He asks what method he used to soften his sword and if he could use it now. But the protagonist thinks he has no strength left. But he also doesn't want to miss the chance of having a blacksmith see his sword. At that moment, Sari appears, scolding him that this wasn't the time to train. It said they are very close, like father and daughter, so they decide to leave it for tomorrow. The next day, the protagonist is training and the blacksmith is interested in him and wants to make him a sword. But there is one thing that saddens him. To make the best sword, he needs a mysterious mineral, one that can't be found anywhere. It's called Quilla, which the protagonist did have, but he wasn't supposed to say anything, since only his father and the Grand Chamberlain knew about it. He says it was fate, and that he would make a sword, asking for 3 weeks. 3 weeks later, the blacksmith's workshop had caught fire. He believes something truly unusual must have happened for that to occur. He thinks he can cut through the fire and the door all at once. Julian tells him it's reckless. He manages to get inside and find Master Hansen, and also sees his new sword. And it seems she was the cause of the fire, but first he has to get the master out. But the exit was blocked. Everything was ablaze. Julian asks if he knows any defensive techniques. He remembers one, telling himself he was now Vinchen Denka, but he was also David Simon. Julian is amazed. They were alive. The blacksmith asks how he survived and how he knows to use the Simon technique, but the protagonist thinks he must still be dreaming. Maybe he hit his head. The blacksmith says maybe that's true because it was impossible, and by the way, his sword was ready. The protagonist feels the sword resonates with him, and Julian notices something strange. He thinks the founder left the whole bone for a reason. So he'll ask the blacksmith if he can make another sword, an even more perfect one, and by chance, he had another material. The protagonist apologizes for asking for a share of the material, but she didn't mind. She got paid for the material 14 years ago. That day, a remarkable warrior was born. He tells her he'll make her even prouder, that today he'll learn all her moves and defeat her, but she has told him many times it won't be that easy. She attacks and is surprised the sword is still intact, and the flow and power are different from what it had before. The protagonist admits he has grown much stronger, and at that moment, he disappears. The protagonist thinks he won't be fooled by her speed. He just has to feel the mana of the movement. After that, the protagonist asks her to grab her sword, saying he doesn't want an empty victory. She says she just crossed the line between confidence and arrogance, and that she would regret it. The protagonist tells her he defeated her and that there are 4 months left before entering the Red Fortress. She wonders how he managed to beat her. He explains that it was impossible to cut her, even with a sword strike. But he could cut her mana, so he divided her mana with a line on the ground. She can't believe such an ability exists and that he always exceeds her expectations. Because of that, he will teach her his blessing, the galaxy mana flow. Wanderer, the protagonist, manages to create the symbol with his mana, and a lady of ice appears at the Red Fortress or Academy. While they're talking, these two guys realize that Vinchen is going to enter that academy, which was a nuisance for them, since he had no talent. So before he entered the academy, they had to stop him. Julian asks what that was and why it was so cold. But suddenly it disappeared. The blessing was complete. Julian and the protagonist are studying. They think the Red Fortress looks more like a real fortress than a training school. It was located on the edge of the family mountains. Simon says that the heroes of the era, including Aslan, served as defenders there. They think they can find more treasures there, left by the founder. And there's also a legend called the Celestial Fruit Treasure. It was more effective than any elixir in that world, and there are even rumors that one of them can resurrect the dead, and that there's even a tree that produces thousands of those fruits. Julian didn't believe in such tales before, but seeing the situation, it was the best, since they only had 9 years left to live. The protagonist tells him that, according to the information, the cost of living is part of a rule that the family cannot interfere with to avoid cheating in the academy. Julian tells him not to worry, that he invested his money. In a place called the Hay Towers, there's a mage named Barney Lai, who became his sponsor, and on an external plane, she is murdered, and the two reading the newspaper couldn't believe it. Julian, especially his legacy, said he left him the results of his experiment, and he bequeathed it to his only brother, Pagoda Vargan. He believes that although they were born with the same surname, they never really got along. For months later, in a mountain range near the fortress, the Great Chamberlain tells them that for security reasons, they must walk. From that point, he asks the protagonist to please take care of himself. At the academy, they say that the guests will arrive soon, but then they receive news that there are low-rank monsters near the village, and she is going there to take care of the rest. And she escapes. The commander-in-chief will have to take charge. He spots the Great Chamberlain and thinks that the protagonist must not be that weak, and that it was a great opportunity to test him. The first stage would begin. The protagonist explains that he will be happy to receive their welcome. He asks everyone to run to the academy. He jumps at great speed to get the white tiger's attention. Now he has it, but he feels uneasy. The white tiger seems somewhat strange. It was about to attack, but a second white tiger appears. The protagonist has to climb a tree. and is surprised to see that there are 18 white tigers, but something was strange: the white tiger never travels in packs, so it should be an illusion. And that kind of magic has a trick: you can't control them all, because it consumes a lot of mana. So an alpha is left as a connection point, who always positions himself at the back to see the whole panorama. The leader is surprised, since he can use the snow step technique, and has reached the alpha's location. The sword now has the ability to absorb the blessing skill. It was a perfect combination. He not only defeated the monsters, but also broke their mana circuit. He has a deep knowledge of magic. It wasn't like they said, opening the gates and announcing their welcome. He introduces himself. He was Vargan Julian. He was already resigned about his money. But there was also a mentorship system at that academy, and the money he had invested was going to be recovered. Here we were explained how the academy was. In that academy, there were many children from various families. The instructors, priests, soldiers, and many others would be the assistants accompanying them. He would have a group life in his dormitory, and living there meant becoming a cadet, and all cadets take the promotion exam twice a year. Starting from level 9, the levels exist from level 9 down to level 1, and when he reaches level 1 and passes the test, he will be recognized as a true warrior and will graduate from the fortress. The protagonist thinks he must graduate as soon as possible, since in 4.5 years he must find the cure to avoid his death. He has arrived at his building. The assistants stay on the first floor, and Vincent will live on the 3rd floor, in room number 5 of the Red Fortress. In the dormitory, there was an atmosphere of fear, and behind the protagonist appears Marlon. Also, Julian tells him that he was the most annoying being who even made him eat trash. The protagonist remembers. He was a guy whose life was dedicated to intimidating people with his strength. That's why they acted that way. He thinks he should scold him a little. Julian thinks that would be too little, that he should be crushed. The protagonist greets and thinks it has been a long time since he left his hometown, and he couldn't believe he was still at level 9. Marlon asks Zeeson if he has badly raised young Master Vincent, and if he disrespects him again, he would beat him up. Vincent thinks his attitude is disgusting and hits him. Marlon thinks he should remind him to respect him, but the protagonist dodges and, with a maneuver, sends him to the ground. Let everyone hear. The only fear allowed would be the fear of amazement. Marlon was furious. How dare he try to surpass him? In a town near the fortress, there was the captain, who had been offered some drinks for defeating monsters, and Chief Bargain appears, expressing that he needed a drink. They were talking about how the protagonist was nothing like what they knew, and just then a call came saying that Marlon and Vincent had requested a confrontation. Brun, the instructor of the level 9 residents, apologizes, but says he had no choice but to accept. Everything was ready, and the chief hopes they fight with honor. The protagonist draws his sword. Marlon thinks that sword is a fake from his father and bets his right hand that he will surrender to him. The protagonist tells him that he will have to take responsibility for his words. Marlon uses intimidation. That was a trait that instilled fear in his opponent. But the protagonist believes that a sword bearer should not fear another opponent. Marlon doesn't understand why the protagonist isn't affected. But maybe it's because he's far away. So in that case, he will use his sword. He asks where the protagonist appeared from. He kicks him and immediately attacks with his sword. A character named Selvira arrives and says the protagonist fights very well, but Marlon was not defeated yet. Intimidation is not the only trait he has. He possesses a very rare blessing. One of the strongest gods who controls electricity. The Thunder Giants. Julian doesn't understand it, since recently he only had the power of fear. But he had just hidden it. There is no need to show it. The protagonist gets angry. Not using his powers tramples on the efforts of others. It was a dishonor. Marlon replies that he shouldn't think he's so great just because he has a fake sword. Marlon was losing control. Selvira was in danger. Chief Brown saves her and gives orders for everyone to evacuate. Marlon yells at the protagonist to stop running. The protagonist was already at his limit, and the chief places a mana barrier to calm the destruction, but this reduces the space for the protagonist to move. The fight becomes a bit more complicated. The protagonist was in trouble, but he hears a voice telling him he can cut through more things and to trust him. Marlon had the protagonist cornered. but he attacks the barrier. And Marlin's attack causes a rock slide that traps him. He tells him he must keep his word and cuts off his arm. The commander and chief are shocked. The barrier they made was on a completely different level. That barrier had several spells, but a simple attack destroyed it. Wilson appears with a priest asking whose level 2 plate that was. The protagonist says it's his, and asks him to please heal his arm. Marlin screams at him desperately that all of that was his plan and that he would heal his arm, but the protagonist thinks he gave his word, so maybe it wasn't such a good idea to heal his arm. Since they could lose the family's honor, more people arrive and ask him again, heal his arm or recover his honor. But he can't hear them and asks them to repeat it. Marlin doesn't care about the family's honor, so please fix his arm, sighs. He wants to be like the protagonist. Elvira thinks that if you look at him closely, he was very handsome. Marlin was still very angry, hungry for revenge, and believed it was still time to teach him a lesson. But the chief commander stops him. 1 week later, the protagonist and the chief commander are talking. They have a very long conversation. But in summary, the protagonist offers his condolences for his sister and that he had invested in her. He knew how he might feel since he knew his story, that he was a talentless child, oppressed by others, and that he went through many hardships when he was young, under the great shadow of his sister. But he tells him to shut up, that he knows nothing about him, that he will destroy the tower that ruined his life. However, the protagonist tells him he perfectly understands that feeling. He also only wanted revenge, but realized that he only wanted recognition and love from his family. The chief commander never thought he would hear life advice from a 15-year-old, but that meant a lot to him. He tells him not to worry, that he will be his guardian in the fortress for life. Julian was happy. He had recovered his money. We switch to Marlin's perspective, who was furious, still wanting to kill the protagonist when a voice appears to him. It was an evil spirit asking if he wanted to kill him, and that would help him. In another plane there are these two congratulating the protagonist for winning. She was a cadet of the level 9 vice commander. She has the ability to see characteristics. He can touch people and realizes that the protagonist has no limits, but he doesn't like his way of greeting, which was analyzing him. That was disrespectful, and Selvira is even more surprised. Not even the instructors could figure it out the first time. They tell the protagonist that wandering around at night is forbidden and that he might encounter Davin's evil spirit. The protagonist asks for more information about that, blushing Selvira and sees sense. He tells them it is a spirit that makes contracts with people. Back in the room, the protagonist notices that Marlin wasn't in his bed. Then, C-Sense is outside on guard but hears something. He asks who's there, and his arm is severed. The creators of this have something going on because they cut off everyone's arm. It was Marlin, and he was ripped. Now he had the strength of an evil spirit and only wanted one thing: revenge against Vincent. He tells him he's not afraid, but Marlin grabs him by the neck and says he will be executed. But a saving attack comes to his aid. It was Instructor Braun, who says that his attack didn't work at all and to ring the emergency bell. They inform the protagonist that this was the emergency alarm, that something must have happened. He tells Selvira that C-Sense might be in danger and that he smells blood. He yells at everyone to follow him. He asks Selvira if there's any defense they can use. She only knows one that might work. However, that formation absolutely requires an instructor, since none of them can withstand the mana load. They go outside and see the grim scene. Instructor Braun was lying on the ground, covered in blood. Marlin tells him he found him and launches an attack. The protagonist manages to react and says he will show them the true power of a king. The protagonist is shouting, "We're together. Don't be afraid and draw your swords." He thinks maybe he can't fight Brandon alone, but at that moment he's not alone. He has to buy as much time as possible until the commander arrives and they can form the triangular defense. The protagonist is shouting, "We are together. Don't be afraid and draw your swords." He thinks that maybe he can't fight Brandon alone, but at that moment he isn't alone. He has to buy as much time as possible until a commander arrives and they can form the triangular defense. Selva repeats to him that he won't be able to, that they at least need one person of class 5, and the protagonist says he will do it, he will be at the center. But that was nonsense. It didn't make much sense. He doesn't have much mana, much less his 5-star. He will faint as soon as he activates the triangular defense. But the protagonist says that at that moment he must act like the cadet representative Selvira and use his judgment to protect everyone. She shouts to form a triangular defense, and the center will be Vincent. Julian tells her they should run. Running is an option, but if the protagonist does that, everyone behind him will end up dead. Activate the formation. The protagonist's mana is being consumed quickly, but he must hold on. He must not hesitate. Marlon attacks. He thinks it was ridiculous that bastard was capable of holding the formation barrier, but he would see if he could withstand this attack. The protagonist and the students realize the immense power Marlon had. Now they feel great fear, great terror. They feel cornered, and the protagonist shouts, "Don't be afraid. Fear is something a warrior who does not fear a man who has betrayed his honor must not allow." Elvira thinks he can't be 14 years old. He is enduring the mana and leading without losing his composure. He was impressive. They come to their senses. Their spirits are sky high with confidence. Thanks to the protagonist, sending Marlon flying, and that soon the elders will arrive, and time is on their side, if he surrenders. Now, he will avoid the worst, but Marlon is determined. The only thing he wants is to see them die, even risking his life if necessary. With that last attack, one person comes out, injured, meaning the barrier was missing a member, which made it very weak. It was the perfect opportunity for Marlon to kill the protagonist. But the barrier does not break. It was the one-armed Chi-sun, who's still bleeding, had the courage to support the protagonist and repeats to Marlon that he is not afraid of him. Marlon shouts at them that they should surrender. The protagonist's energy was reaching its limit. He won't last much longer. And he realizes he can see the directions of his sword. It was the perfect opportunity for Marlon to kill the protagonist. But the barrier doesn't break. It was the one-armed Chi-sun who, still bleeding, had the courage to support the protagonist and repeats to Marlon that he is not afraid of him. Marlon shouts at them to surrender. The protagonist's energy was reaching its limit. He wouldn't last much longer. And he realizes he can see the directions of his sword. He is very indecisive. He has no mana left to hesitate or not to hesitate, and there was no other option. The barrier was breaking, so Vincent will attack with a fencing combination, but his attack was very superficial. Vincent was in trouble. A direct attack hit his left hand, which had been injured, but he still attacked Marlon. He yells at him, asking if he thought this time he would defeat him by burning his hand and dropping his sword. The protagonist thinks that in his last life, he didn't have that chance, and grabs the sword with his right hand, attacking and cutting Marlon's arm. Marlon was still in the battle. The evil spirit had left. The protagonist had cut the spiritual connection, but he could still keep fighting. Marlon yells that he will definitely break him into 1,000 pieces. And the protagonist can't move. He had run out of mana. He was lost, but it was the commander-in-chief who saved him. And Marlon is frozen and temporarily trapped. The redhead asks if it was Vincent. Denka has heard a lot about him, but the protagonist was so injured he couldn't speak. She was very proud of him. Today, he saved many people. The protagonist loses consciousness. He transports to a room full of mirrors, where Julian is excessively challenging him. Since because of him, he almost died. Neither of them knows where they are. They suspect it might be Marlon's mind. They see a memory of him and the commander-in-chief expressing that he has to try hard, that he should perform the ritual right now, and the protagonist feels a sinister aura. There is nothing around anymore, only darkness. His mother appears, telling him that if he doesn't, he could die. He also manages to see his teacher, his friend, and Arslan. And he also feels Kajin stabbing. He remembers his life in prison. Young Arslan appears. "I will fight for my brother's honor, no matter how long it takes. And adult Arslan tells him. Arslan is Julian, but the protagonist can't hear him. Arslan says again, "See you, brother, in 500 years." The protagonist wakes up screaming. He wonders if Arslan came to visit him before he died. Wilson and Sari burst into tears. They were very happy that the protagonist woke up, and the protagonist thanks them for their concern. They were very happy that the protagonist woke up, and he thanks them for their concern. The commander regrets having interrupted that moment. She is Urka Kebel. She came to ask the protagonist if he wanted to have a battle against the Simon family. This battle would take place at the Friendship Exchange meeting, which marks the beginning of martial arts and the direct descendants of the family. Denka and the direct descendants of the Simon family participate in a fight. It is such a big event that the two patriarchs of the family come to watch, and this year it was decided that the Friendship Exchange will be held at the Red Fortress. In other words, Vincent and someone from Simon will face off at the fortress. The protagonist wonders why they are calling him. She tells him that Marlon was supposed to face the Simon family, but now things have turned out this way. He was the only one from the Denka family who is the same age and has similar skills. He will face the seventh son, Ganja Simon, a genius who can even hear the sound of the next attack. Neither public opinion nor Marlon himself thought they could have a chance to win. In fact, they don't have much confidence in the protagonist either. It's just to fulfill the duty and for him to gain experience. But the protagonist says no, that would go against the principles of the Denka family. Then the patriarch enters, asking if he can take responsibility for his words, and the protagonist definitely promises he will win in return. He tells him it's a good attitude and he can't wait to see the result. The patriarch and Urka withdraw. She tells him she will give Vincent a prize for his performance and for saving his comrades, and that she will engrave Vincent's name on the red tombstone, he himself. She can't believe it. We are explained that in the fortress there's a giant monument with the names of the heroes of a Denka. Only those who achieve great feats will leave their names on that red tombstone, and that they will see each other in 3 days. The protagonist thinks about the Friendship Exchange event. His mission is to surpass the Simon family. One day that family will have to be defeated by his sword. So, this is a good opportunity to see what level he is at. The Simon family at that moment. But he asks Julian if he knew anything about the sixth prince of the Simon family. He only knows that he is a prince with great potential. He is praised by many, as he has received a high-level education. He will have at least 3 fully matured stars. The protagonist concludes that, after all, the power difference is immense and he can't rest. First, he must move that body. Julian shouts at him to please take care of his body. The protagonist thinks he must mentally prepare to win, and an old friend arrives. It was Raven, who came to visit him because the job he gave him uncovered certain information to start with. He still doesn't know anything, but once he asked his father and he revealed the whole truth, since he will be his successor someday, and that he should follow him through that door. He didn't even have the chance to enter. The Denka family was the story of Denka that has not been revealed to the world. He found a book from the Isleys, but he will only be able to show it when he inherits his father's position. But he still has a long way to go. The protagonist is extremely grateful, since there were records from 500 years ago, and it's possible that also there's a record that proves his innocence, and that Raven has been very helpful. He thanks him again. Raven still had something to deliver. The blacksmith had a message for him. He found out it was impossible to make the sword he requested, but with the bone he gave him, it is possible to make a hammer. The protagonist thinks that if he had more bones, they could make a perfect sword, but since he doesn't have them, he asks him to just make the bone hammer. They say their goodbyes, and the protagonist thanks him for coming to see him. For the protagonist, new possibilities have opened up. This was the beginning of needing to become stronger to face what's coming now, and that he has to win that confrontation against Simon's sixth prince. Julian tells him it was extremely difficult, since Marlon had the blessing of lightning, and even he couldn't defeat him. But if he could obtain the blessing of the giant king of lightning, maybe the protagonist had a chance. He thinks it's impossible to get it. Julian says he remembers seeing it when it appeared in his memories, and that human memory was pretty dumb, but a god's memory could recall it. He shows him the mana flow. Quick pause to tell you that if you are enjoying this kind of content, please like and subscribe. Let's continue with the video. The protagonist gets excited and asks why he didn't say it earlier. Julian thought it could put his body at risk. Lightning mana is the most destructive of all the elements. Also, the flow of the lightning giant is the highest level among them. If he tried, his body would collapse now. He tells him he has to sleep at least 9 hours and forbids exercise. And if he doesn't take care of himself, he won't tell him anything about the mana flow. 3 days later, at the Red Fortress, the redhead tells the protagonist that all the barracks will come to his ceremony, since placing the name on the mural is something unique. All levels are there. Level 2, Level 3, Level 4, Level 5, Level 6, and Level 7. All commanded by Vincent's brothers. They all look great, but especially the representative of the first class, Princess Gina, who just standing there gave the protagonist goosebumps. The Level 9 members were also there, which made Vincent very happy. And everyone was surprised since the patriarch himself would carve the name. He tells everyone that this recognition was earned with pride and begins to carve the name with mana. He tells the protagonist not to forget his name is Vincent Denka. Then Vincent is meditating, trying to connect the mana points, but Julian can't concentrate because he was so happy. It was something very important to him. His father had recognized him. The protagonist tells him they also said he would win the duel, and that they need the lightning giant to exceed those expectations. Julian expresses that he will work hard. After several attempts, the lightning giant had appeared, but the protagonist, he was suffering. His mind was out of control. The lightning giant spoke. It was amusing to see a human with so much confidence. There had been guys like him before. He awakened divine protection and called him. So he granted his blessing. But the protagonist absorbs mana like cotton, and at this rate, he will die. To save him, Julian should stop the flow. But if he did, the lightning giant would not bless him again. The giant says there are only 2 options: die or receive his blessing. He yells at the protagonist that if he stops now, he won't be able to get divine protection, that he must control the mental energy and keep it in his body. When that stage is fully complete, his protection will be his. Julian can't just stand by. Even though his spirit is weak, he must protect the protagonist's heart. He did, but the power of lightning is very strong. It's not a power he can control. The protagonist's heart is overflowing with energy. Julian asks him to hold on a little longer. If his heart explodes, it will be the end for both of them. Julian had used too much energy and was starting to disappear. He doesn't want to die, and the protagonist falls to the ground. Julian shouts desperately for someone to help, and a fortress priest appears, who can hear Julian because he is a small god. He explains that he must quickly heal his brother and that he will block the lightning so he can get closer. Julian blocks all the lightning with a barrier. He was willing to endure it, even if it cost him his life. On another plane are the commander and Sari, who asks if he had thought about the proposal to learn magic, and she says yes, she was willing to learn magic. When he rescued her, he felt all her mana. He had never taught magic to anyone and knows his methods aren't the best. But he will try hard, and she will try to do her best. She will work hard to protect the protagonist. And suddenly, they feel an explosion. It was the protagonist, who was kneeling thinking that now he has a chance to win the fight. Then, Sari asks permission to learn magic. Julian, everything disappeared. He tells him it was a great opportunity, and he agrees. Sari tells him to do his best. Vincent asks the commander that, now that he thinks about it, he is the only one who doesn't have a master to teach him the Denka family techniques in the fortress, and now he must put all his energy into the exchange event. He asks where his master was. At the academy. He says, what were you talking about? That every student was supposed to bring their own master. The family elders always provide one, but Julian tells him there was no elder in the family to support him. He sends a letter to the Grand Chamberlain to pass it to the Patriarch. The Patriarch reads it and says that Vincent needs a master. He also says he has the blessing of the lightning giant. He asks if there's no one in the family and if she can train him, but she refuses, since she doesn't use the Denka family techniques, but she knows the right person for the role. He was a powerful man who uses the Denka family skills, and also possesses a lightning giant. They change his position. He could be his master, and she will convince him. the captain of the White Sword Squad. Merlin was recalling that several months had passed since Vincent left. He wonders what he might be doing. The Grand Chamberlain appears, who had requested the meeting to offer him a new position at the Red Fortress Training Institute. He apologizes, but says he will refuse. She tells him she wants him to teach someone special. It's about the useless son, Vincent, who was very young and lacked the support of the elders. The chance of him becoming the head of the family was low, and he had no other sponsors, but there's one more thing he obtained: the lightning giant. He was honestly interested, but there were several reasons why he couldn't. He was already on the elders' radar, being pushed around, and on top of that, they wanted him to be someone's master. The elders have not supported him, so the Grand Chamberlain, seeing that he refused, makes him a bet. The competition will soon come between the princes, and if Prince Vincent wins, he will have to become his master. A few days later, the protagonist thinks he must become stronger. He must control the lightning Annie, but he fails to control it. Julian believes he cannot control it at all. The protagonist recalls the Grand Chamberlain's letter, which said to excuse him, that he had not been able to find a suitable master for him. His first choice refused, and the Council of Elders will not want him to interfere. In the succession plan they have devised, they explain that the Council of Elders exists to control the power of the family head. So it is even difficult for them to do anything, which is why he will have to fight alone. In that exchange, Julian thinks he can take on the Simon family's skills, but he cannot, because if he uses those techniques in public, it would cause an uproar. Then, in Simon territory, at his castle, is his opponent, who is facing a white tiger. They tell him that his opponent will be the seventh son of the Denka house, whom they call useless. Vincent and Denka, everyone expects him to win, so he must make him suffer. All kinds of humiliations people want. A crushing victory. He states that he will give the world what it wants, and that the world will know he is a superior being, tearing the white tiger to pieces. Back at the academy, Selvera runs to give the protagonist a gift, and when she enters the room, a clash of big hands spreads. He had never seen that skill before. The protagonist asks what is happening. She shows him her gift. It was a recording of his opponent. He thanks her, which makes Selvera blush, but she warns him to be careful with the last part, because it is very cruel in showing the fight. The protagonist realizes that, both in appearance and in combat, he was identical to Kajin, and even his rival accepts his defeat. But he does not stop. He is just like Kajin in every way. Even the smallest habits the protagonist needs to know. Then, at the friendship exchange ceremony meeting, it is specified that this event will have 3 stages. The first part will be a treasure hunt to find a chest in a magical dungeon. The second stage will be a war of subjugation to tame the captured monsters. Finally, there will be a face-to-face confrontation, which will be the final climax event of the friendship exchange. The first thing they have to decide is which monsters will be on the first level. The commander proposes 2 monsters suitable for that level, but these guys propose 2 monsters extremely strong. Level 5 players would definitely have trouble. And why such an uproar? It was an event being held for the first time in many years, and the audience would be excited by the difficulty. The 2 were about to fight, but the host decided the matter by voting those in favor of entertainment raise their hands, and everyone raises their hand by majority vote. Prepare the giant beasts, the Furactua beast. One day before the event, the 2 are working, commenting that all the mages were colluding, but if Vincent won, he would teach them a lesson. She thinks she misheard. She reminds him that the probability of Vincent winning is 10%, but even so, both believed in the protagonist. On the day of the friendship exchange, all the reporters think that if he was Marlin's substitute, even for the lower family, a Denka, it was a disgrace. The prince of the Simons family also arrives, who was delighted to meet Vincent. The prologue greets him and was also delighted to meet him. Vincent thinks it wasn't so bad, but there was something strange. It was that sinister smile. The prince of Simons asks him to, please, show what his family is capable of. That comment put the Denka family down, but the protagonist replies that he hopes he can also demonstrate his skills. Everyone was surprised. The protagonist didn't let himself be intimidated. He was only thinking about winning on the friendship exchange stage. Everyone was excited. Most supported Prince Zamer. They explained that door number 1 was about to start. Behind door number 1, the treasure hunt would take place, in which the two participants would enter a space created by magical arts, where they would have to find a box like that one. However, there is a magical spell in that space which generates monsters, and inside, as the guardian, will be the giant Furactua. The two participants can choose 2 level 9 cadets to accompany them in the trial. The redhead says she absolutely has to choose Selvyra, who is the best, but the protagonist has other plans and chooses Chisen and Cadet Harmon. Everyone present was amazed, since both cadets had the lowest scores in level 9. The stadium filled with negative comments. They thought he would use that as an excuse for his defeat. But on the contrary, he had chosen them to avoid giving Simon an excuse, and secondly, he had a plan. Thanks to Selvyra and the prince, Simon would go for excellence, choosing the first and second highest-rated cadets. The protagonist knew this. The stage had been tilted from the start in favor of Prince Simon, so he couldn't make any excuses. When he lost, the mage didn't understand what the protagonist intended. In the first stage, the treasure hunt had begun. The prince asked if they could walk a little further away from him and not interfere in the trial. Everyone was eager for the monsters to appear. The protagonist's allies didn't judge his decision, but they doubted if they would really be helpful. He told them not to worry, that all he needed were warriors who had conquered their fears. A surprise attack arrived. It was a giant. They wonder where Vincent was. He was up in the air, attacking the giant. He shouts that the chest must be nearby. They will continue with the plan and have the protagonist go for the chest, drawing the monster's attention, which reacts to the sound. The protagonist acknowledges that they were brave enough and sets off to find the chest. The commanders believe the protagonist misunderstood the test, which was to demonstrate strength. During the process, the protagonist sees the chest, but is struck by a blow from a second giant. For the sake of the plan, he should clear things with a single attack. But 2 giants complicated things, and even that giant is responding at his speed. The commander scolds him for why there were 2 giants almost hitting him, criticizing his dirty way of doing things. The redhead calms him down because he can't cause a scene, since many people are present. But as for him, she'll deal with him later. At the other gate, the prince of the Simons family was beating the giant. When the other appeared, he was able to defend himself without much effort, asking the giants to get up to continue with the show. Meanwhile, the protagonist was trying to come up with a new plan. He needed to finish both with 1 strike, but he also needed to mark the targets and look seriously at Julian. The 2 comrades could no longer advance. They were in trouble. But the protagonist arrives and says there's a change of plans because the other will arrive very soon. They think they're going to die. The protagonist shouts at Julian to get ready. He doesn't want to be the target. The protagonist must find a third target, one that should feel something like his soul, and Julian's presence was perfect. 2 giants had been defeated with a single blow. The protagonist had put on a more than worthy show. Julian scolds him for what happened. They ask the protagonist who he was talking to, but it was nothing. He thanks them for their effort, and to finish, the protagonist breaks the portal and the entire dungeon. The mage shouts that was ridiculous. They should disqualify him, but the redhead tells him there was no rule forbidding doing that, and as leader of the mage council, he should remain neutral, and asks if he wasn't very angry about such a situation. The allies ask if Vincent had already won, since he brought the chest first, but no, not yet, because the test is to prove strength. Prince Simon's turn was just beginning as the prince. Simons was still showing his experience. If he kept this up, it would be a clear victory for him. But the protagonist interrupts. Simon was about to discover that we had already finished the test. He explains that the dungeons used concentration elements, which were identical, and the protagonist destroyed one when he left. So the mana that made up its replica, where did it go? He explains that if before the water flowed in 2 directions, and he just blocked one, therefore, the mana that contained its door would go to the other. Simon's monster had become much stronger. He thinks something was happening outside. Very recently that guy was dying, but now he had much more speed and much more strength. He was in danger. He had to get up, and Selvyra steps into action. making noise to distract the monster. But to her bad luck, the second giant appears along with Gaston with a murderous glare, repeating how he dared to kill the two giants with a single blow. But he repeats again how he dares to ruin their plans. He will never forgive him. Leaving the dungeon, Simon believes the door was successfully completed. He found the chest, and in the end left a good impression, no matter how bad he was. He is better than Vincent. The protagonist tells him he's a bit late. Judging by his face, he must have liked his gift quite a lot. He realizes that the giant's commotion was all part of the protagonist's plan. He has been playing into his hands since the start of the portal. He accepts his defeat, thinks he underestimated him, but now it will be different. He's starting to see him as a true friend. And in the end, the winner of that test is Cadet Vincent. Meanwhile, Selvyra is walking down the hallway and is glad Vincent won. And Prince Simons arrives. He tells her he regrets not having thanked her, that thanks to her he was saved from a serious blow, and shakes her hand. Selvyra doesn't know why, but she feels a strange, sinister sensation in that hand. But he gives it to her anyway, and the prince, without saying another word, leaves with a sinister look. He says goodbye to Cadet Selvyra in the forest outside Sari Castle. She is training, and Wilson comes to deliver food and clothes. He tells her that young Vincent won. She was outside to sign a contract with the spirits and hears a voice asking for help. She wonders whose voice it was. At the academy, they were celebrating the protagonist's first victory with apple juice. The protagonist tells her that thanks to her, he was able to win, because if he hadn't helped Gaston, he wouldn't have been able to stand out. When they bump fists, the protagonist realizes that Selvyra had Simon's chain ceremony. He asks if she had any contact with Gaston. She says she recently shook hands with him. The protagonist curses Simon's prince because he used an art that restricted the opponent's mana and gradually led them to death. He asks Selvyra to train with him every morning, and she agrees. He tells Julian that he can't tell her about the curse because if he does, it could kill her. Using these kinds of tactics was unforgivable. It had nothing to do with the competition. She apologizes for being late and asks if she looks okay. The protagonist asks why she dressed up to train. Julian thinks the protagonist, in his past life, was a eunuch whom she clearly liked, but the protagonist thinks he's 35 years old, and she's about 14. Then, when starting meditation, he sees it's impossible. The power he had couldn't dissolve the spell. It was stronger than he thought, and if he breaks it, Selvyra's heart could explode. But if things continue like this, she will die in 3 days. He thinks what he's about to say will sound very cold, but the event was in 3 days. He shouldn't focus more on the competition, but the protagonist expresses that the lives of comrades are much more important than anything else, and he tells Selvyra that's all for today. He understands very well the pain Selvyra will feel, as in his past life, he went through the same thing. Right behind them, Selvyra falls unconscious. She had collapsed in bed. They didn't know what was wrong with her, and she would have to be moved to the capital as soon as possible, but the protagonist knows that even there they won't be able to do anything, and that there was only one alternative he had to find: the sacrifice used in the ceremony. Gaston shouts that in this life he won't lose any comrades, and in the forest he finds Sari. He tells her he was looking for a sacrifice, and that it was most likely a spirit. He is in a hurry, so he will move on, but Kelly tells him she could be helpful this time. She hears a spirit asking for help on that cliff. Sari finds the spirit, who had a chain. The scene was too cruel for her. She asks if there was any way to help him, but unfortunately, there was none. The best thing would be to give him a quick death, but she refuses. She thinks there's still a way out, and Sari manages to free him. The protagonist was very proud of her, and suddenly an attack appears. It was Gaston. He tells her she's interrupting his ritual and will need a good excuse to do so, since he's committing a diplomatic mistake with the Simon family, and if she lets the spirit go now, he will let it slide. The protagonist yells that he was trying to kill Selvyra. He asks what kind of tradition that was. Gaston says then he already knew everything, that as he knows, sometimes people are said to have an innate character. People like him or Vincent were born with a destiny, and there were also others completely different from them, and anyone who dared to cross that line deserves to be punished. And since he was already his friend on the same level, he thinks he should understand that this was his true character, but Vincent threatens him. Not to get any illusions, his definition was wrong. They were both under each other's sword in their confrontation. It would be decided on the day of the assembly. Then the protagonist asks if Selvyra was okay. And indeed, the chain ceremony had disappeared. There was no trace of it. They tell Vincent they should focus on the event. Only 2 days remained. The event now was to subdue a demonic beast, and he would win at the Denka residence. The elders and family leaders believe Vincent will be an obstacle for them in their plan to control the next patriarch, because if he becomes patriarch, there will be no way to control him. They cannot allow him to succeed in the upcoming events, so they will devise a strategy against the protagonist. 2 days later, the stadium was once again packed. The anticipation was even greater. The second trial had begun. For Gaston, in this trial there is only one rule. The winner is the one who defeats the monster in the shortest time. The monster they must defeat is a lizardman. They have the habit of using long spears, which makes for a powerful attack, and the family prince, Simon, uses the Red Light Moon Song chapter to split the lizardman in half, achieving a record time of 14 seconds. It was the best time ever, even surpassing Princess Diane, who held a record of 20 seconds. The entire crowd goes wild. He was different, and he declares to Vincent that this victory was for him. Julian asks the protagonist if he could beat that time, but the protagonist has a plan. The second trial is about to start. He notices something strange about his lizardman. At the Denka residence, they say they did nothing in that trial. They were innocent. The only thing they did was not feed that lizardman for 2 days. It wouldn't help much, but at least it would delay it a few minutes. The bloodshot eyes were clearly a sign of hunger and ferocity. The lizardman is released. The protagonist thinks about dodging it, but if he dodges, he won't be able to defeat it faster than Gaston, so he spreads his arms, signaling it to attack freely. They shout at him to dodge, but Vincent is pierced by the lizardman's spear, and he thanks it for saving him time, thrusting his sword and unleashing all the energy of the Lightning King's blessing, causing a massive explosion. They were surprised. The protagonist had done 5 seconds and 39 milliseconds, the young Vincent. Denka was the winner of the second stage. The priests enter. They say it was quite a serious round, and the protagonist looks at Simon with a smile on his face, showing that he was the winner, and the second stage was over. The third gate would open in 3 days. In a carriage, an unrevealed character expresses that they can't wait to see the protagonist. The priest's diagnosis is that if the protagonist pushes himself again, he might never compete again. Manhwa appears. The redhead asks for the heads of the Denka family, and also the Simon family to be raised. They had arrived, and invited him to dinner. At the table, the four were dining. She was happy to meet the protagonist, pointing a knife at him. The protagonist feels a great power, making Vincent grab the hilt of his sword. He realizes she was truly powerful. He was dying to fight her in the future, and the patriarch points a fork at Gaston. But Gaston didn't understand and tells him that at least he was polite, that he didn't draw a weapon at the table. Julian and the protagonist agree that the two are fighting for their children's pride. After dinner, the two meet on the balcony. She says there are guys messing with their children. How dare they? He thought she was behind it too, but she confirms that at first she was, but then the elders and the mages interrupted, and their target was Vincent, and he can only say that a Denka must be the winner of this trial, and nothing will stand in the way of victory, since Vincent would win unconditionally over Gaston. He promised it. The protagonist made a promise that he was going to win, and the patriarch firmly believes in her. The matriarch of the Simon family says Vincent is very talented, but in this trial, he is destined to lose. The next day, again the stadium was full and louder. With more excitement, no one believed the protagonist could have won those 2 trials, but today all the confidence was with the Simon family. Since they should save their pride, everything was ready. The end of the friendship exchange meeting, the battle of the third gate. The two clash swords, and the long-awaited battle begins. The entire crowd erupts with excitement. Julian tells him not to forget his condition. He affirms that he knows, and that a heart can withstand at least one attack. One attack must land in this trial. He will exploit Gaston's weakness and win the fight with a single strike, and in that battle, the Thunder Giant will take the stage. The protagonist attacks Julian, but Julian completely nullifies the protagonist's attack. Vincent thinks it was impossible. He can't forget that red mana. No matter how hard he tried, his mind wouldn't let go. That was Kajin's mana that dealt the final defeat. The mana that burns life as fuel, and Julian launches into the attack. The protagonist tries to defend himself, but fresh blood flows from his body. He had pierced his guard. He realizes that this ability was even better than Kajin's. It surpassed him in strength and speed. Kajin attacks with everything again. The protagonist manages to get out of there, but Gaston wasn't willing to give him even a second. He laughs because he's sure of his victory. That was the price for trying to challenge him, and the protagonist pulls out the skill Chapter 3. Sword of 1,000. It was a technique he learned in his past life. It was the technique of one of his best friends, who over time became so strong, even stronger than Kajin, and became the target of the Council of Elders, falling into their trap and dying. But he left that to him, the Sword of 1,000. A Kajin asks what that sword was. The protagonist answers that it was the Sword of Justice, which opposed Simon's family, a sword left behind by a gladiator, who was sacrificed by his family. The prince believes then, it's a terrible technique, that's such a flashy skill, will break immediately. Using the torrential rain skill, the protagonist believes he fights just like Kajin. The whole crowd thinks Gaston has disappeared, but the protagonist knows his strategies very well, predicting all his attacks. Gaston can't believe it. The protagonist thinks he was just like Kajin and normally. He thinks he was just like Kajin and normally. It would mean he is ridiculously strong. But it's different for him because the person who knows Kajin's sword the most is him. The two launch into attack, and the protagonist breaks Kajin's sword. Many think Vincent won, but it hasn't been decided yet. He wasn't the only one with a trump card. Kajin wields the Chim sword, protector of the sword god of Kasak. That was one of the most powerful abilities in that world, but also one of the most dangerous, since it consumes his soul. Even the protagonist is surprised. He didn't know what that ability was. Gaston attacks with inhuman strength. Both are willing to risk their lives to win the fight. The protagonist's sword breaks, but he manages to land a punch with the lightning ability. Both have reached their limit. Victory will be decided with a single blow. Both use their best skills, causing an explosion between the two attacks. But that was the protagonist's plan. Using the smoke as cover, he jumps on top of Gaston and yells for him to watch closely. From that moment on, they are the losers. And the winner of the third gate is Vincent Denka. And Vincent shouts, "Finally, finally. I have won." The elders couldn't believe it, and the Grand Chamberlain tells him he has lost the bet. Well, folks, I hope you really like this summary. And if so, please give a like, write a nice comment, and subscribe, since we'll be uploading summaries over an hour and a half long every 10 to 14 days. So that's it. I hope you support this great project, and I want to thank, from the bottom of my heart, two very special people, Hea Abreu and Michelle Anzarez, who joined the affiliate program. Seriously, thank you so much. And that's it. Love you all a lot.